What do you make of recent organizing in tech that's aimed at determination of company policy rather than narrowly workplace concerns? For instance, Google organizing around the military. So I think the jury is kind of still out on that model, and we should be cautious about fully embracing it. And, in labor organizing, I don't think it's an either or between workplace concerns like wages, benefits, and safety and determining company policy. But I do think there's kind of an order of operations. And what they have at Google is called a minority union, which means only a minority of workers have chosen to be part of the union. And so from this position, they may be able to win certain concessions or raise issues, but they aren't able to really collectively bargain and win contracts that affect the whole workforce. So if we're talking about organizing a fully fledged union and maintaining it and raising the living standards of workers, I think it all starts at home. And I think what I mean by that, the anchor of that often needs to be the shared grievances workers face on the job. That seems to me the best route towards getting to a majority and building the power that's needed to change conditions. And one thing about labor organizing, which I think makes it unique and very important for us to engage in, is that you can't organize by self-selection. Capitalism just throws people together in workplaces. You don't know what kind of political views your coworkers will have, what their views on social issues are, so you don't get to choose who you organize. And that imposes, I think, a kind of discipline on your organizing, and it forces you to try and find common ground and shared interests, even if they're not right in front of your face. And that's something I think we need to do in all of our political work, whether that's in the labor movement or not. So my fear with the kind of organizing you reference at Google is that it could turn into a self-selection organizing. The people that already care about the military industrial complex would join, or the people that already care about mass incarceration will join the union, and they'll be able to build out, among their people, but they won't be able to build out from there if they don't focus first on the issues that don't, they won't be able to build out from there if they're focusing on the issues that don't lend themselves to finding common ground with other coworkers. So that's kind of my fear with that mode. And it seems like every episode I find an excuse to bring up Tony Mazzocchi, and I'm going to do it again. I'm sorry. But I think his organizing relates to this question. And so he was a leader in the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union. He was always raising controversial social and political issues in his union. And after all, he coined the phrase just transition in a union full of oil workers. So he was never afraid to raise them, but he didn't start out by doing that. If you look at his life and his career, he started by making his local union as strong as possible on contract issues. And in doing that, he built up trust and capacity and a leadership ability within his union. And then he went from there. So we want to get to the point of determining company policy. That's ultimately what we want. And unions, from a socialist perspective, we don't like unions just because we like the idea of contracts. This is about building working class power. But if we actually want to get the power to affect company policy, I think we may need to start with the issues that are closest to home and to what workers are experiencing. And I don't want to be entirely dismissive. I think this could be effective in certain situations. I'm interested to see how it plays out at Google, but I'm skeptical about how much that can be applied as a model across the board. And Jen, I don't know if you have any thoughts around that.
I definitely agree with what you're saying, and I think we've touched on this in prior shows. I do have some mixed feelings about white collar unions, I suppose you could call them. I just want to put it out there that any union is better than no union. I think we've said that multiple times, or I hope that we're clear about that. So, I definitely do not want to disparage a union just because it happens to be, what we might call professional managerial class or a white collar union. But just because there has been a lot of white collar unionization as of late, obviously in the tech sector, but also a lot of media outlets have unionized over the last several years and are very open and vocal about the efforts to do so. Again, these are all great. And like you said, the Google union being a minority union is a little bit different. But I think the sort of overarching concern with some of these white collar unions is, I think oftentimes the lack of understanding of labor history or of what a union actually is sometimes comes into play, right? So I know, I don't want to name names, but I know that there are some media unions that sort of treat the union as kind of HR plus, which I think is a phrase I've used on the show before, or like, like a benevolent oversight board that is like there to protect the workers or to, to kind of enforce labor law. And that's maybe like a fraction of that is true, but like a union is the rank and file. Like the union is the members, right? And a union is not a social club. I know that sounds like really crazy to say, but I think that sometimes when the focus is kind of on enforcing company policy or, like divesting from this and that, as you were saying, the tendency I think is there to, and I'm not saying this always happens, but the tendency is there to treat a union as like a collection of like-minded people rather than as this sort of like messy organization of rank and file workers who are, fighting for more, better pay, better benefits, workplace issues on the job. So I don't know if you have thoughts on, white collar unions in general.
Yeah, I mean, and also, white collar versus blue collar, that can be slightly arbitrary, like
It's
in
true.
terms of,
Yeah.
and obviously, there are so many different forms of white collar workers that could have very different pay scales and conditions, and to be fair, and plenty of more blue collar unions also kind of act in a way where it's like the union is servicing the contract where and it's not necessarily like rank and file empowerment.
Sure. Yeah.
But, I kind of look at it more just from a practical basis and, based on my very limited experience, but just from what I know of the labor world, just chances are, just like anywhere else in the world, like most people are at least at first kind of just focused on some of the more immediate day to day. And that's kind of what they're interested in solving or taking care of first. And obviously, the last episode we had Les Leopold, who talked about political education. So, to be clear, I think unions should be taking on bigger social issues. And I think they have a responsibility to be doing that with their members. But, I think when it's like a minority type union, like what's been, I think, happening at Google, it's like, there's going to be a segment that are interested in those type of issues. But the danger is then, what about the average worker that isn't in the union? And to them, oh, that's the place where you go if you're like really concerned about foreign policy, not like, oh, if I have a issue, that's the place that's going to take care of it. So I think that is the danger where, if you develop a reputation or you're just seen in that light instead of this is something that affects every single worker here, no matter your, fully fleshed out political ideas.
Since you brought up Tony Mazzocchi, did he also coin the term social unionism, or was that around? Okay, he did not. That was like around before.
Maybe I can research that for next.
Right. That's for labor, Paul.
Right. Yeah, he did not, but he definitely.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear. I mean, because Tony Mazzocchi is a perfect example. Like, in no way am I saying that like unions should not concern themselves with things like gender and racial pay gaps. Actually, we know that unions are pretty good at eliminating those things. And that was a priority of Tony Mazzocchi's. So I want to put that out there as well, that like, I don't mean to suggest that, oh, like white collar unions like care about like political issues and blue collar unions are like just interested in wages or something. That's not at all what I'm saying. But just based on my, limited, to be quite frank, experience in a white collar union in the past, and working with and around other people who organize with white collar unions and who are in white collar unions, there's it's a mixed bag, I think.
Right.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And I know I've said this before, I think on a previous Labor Paul segment, but a mistake I think sometimes leftists make in the labor movement is like they see their role as like, let me be the person that can bring up the most exotic political issues, not necessarily being, let me be the best organizer, or the person who can help most effectively deal with issues in the workplace. And again, I think it's more about the order of operations. And the great book that Les Leopold wrote on Mazzocchi, when you read it, what made Tony able to do this other kind of organizing was the fact that he first spent a few years in leadership, and he totally just transformed the union, and by consequence, transforming people's living standards, and everything. And after that, people kind of just had this overwhelming trust in him, where if he didn't do that work beforehand, he coming with these ideas, they might have rejected it. But I think once you've earned that kind of trust, that takes time. And I think just there might be a tendency to kind of skip those steps and go right to the thing that we as leftists want to go to, which is like the bigger ideas and the bigger issues,
Yeah.